There is a moment at every front desk where someone knows the answer exists. They just don't know where to find it. So they go find a person. And that small detour, the one nobody writes down, is quietly running your whole operation.
There is something that happens inside hospitality operations every single busy season, and I want you to really see what it is. Almost nobody names it for what it actually is. Almost nobody. Here's an example. A front desk associate gets a question from a guest about a late checkout. She knows late checkouts sometimes get approved, but she does not know the criteria, whether occupancy matters, whether it's a manager call, or whether she even has the authority to say yes. So she does what she has learned to do. She finds a person. She calls the manager and she waits while the guest waits. The manager is already handling something in housekeeping. So 3 minutes pass, then 5, and finally the manager responds. And the answer is yes. The guest gets the late checkout and leaves mildly annoyed, not because the answer was wrong, but because getting to it took longer than it should have. Now, here is the part that should stop you. That employee was not undertrained in any way that would show up on a performance review. She showed up, she cared, and she did exactly what the operation taught her to do. Find a person when you have a question. So the problem was not her. The problem was that the operation never built anything other than her instinct to ask. That is a just ask HR culture in its purest form. And it is costing hospitality businesses far more than they realize, especially right now in the middle of summer staffing season. Let's talk about what is actually happening underneath this pattern, because it's not what most leaders think it is. When employees consistently bring basic operational questions to HR or to a manager or to whoever happens to be nearby and available, the instinct is to read that as a culture win. After all, it means doors are open and people are comfortable asking, and HR is connected to the floor. Now, some of that may be genuinely true, but something else is also true underneath it. The systems that should be answering those questions automatically are not doing that. The documented procedures, the onboarding tools, the manager reference guides, and the clearly communicated policies either were never built or exist somewhere where nobody knows to look, or exist in a format that nobody actually uses. So the human answer replaces the system answer. And because the human answer works, the organization gets one more day without fixing the gap that would make that question unnecessary. That loop is where the real problem is, not the individual question, but the loop itself. Because the loop repeats every single shift, every day, across every department. And every time it repeats, two things happen at the same time. The employee is reinforced for asking a person instead of consulting a system, and the organization gets one more day of deferring the work that would reduce that dependency. A manager had to step in every time to answer the same questions because the answers were living inside them, inside the managers, instead of inside the operation. So let me show you what this looks like when you're inside the operation, because the scenes are probably familiar. It is the second week of July, and you're running at high occupancy. You've brought on a wave of new staff over the past 3 weeks: front desk, housekeeping, food and beverage, banquet. Your veteran team members are stretched to their limits. Your managers are on the floor dealing with real-time issues. And HR is fielding a question volume that feels unsustainable. A new banquet server asks whether the gratuity on a group event is already included or whether the guest would typically add additional tip. He asks his floor supervisor, but they were not sure about the contract for this specific event. So they tell him, check with HR or the event coordinator. HR gets the call, pulls up the contract, finds the answer, and calls back. 20 minutes later, the server has his answer. In the meantime, though, that server is doing what new employees in unclear environments always do. He's watching the room. He's reading the other servers and guessing what he should do next. Across the property, a housekeeping supervisor is managing a situation where a room was not turned in time. She knows what the policy says, but she also knows that the general manager sometimes will make exceptions, especially for long stay guests. And she doesn't want to make the wrong call. So she texts the GM, but the GM is in a meeting. So the room sits. The guest calls the front desk. The front desk calls HR, and HR calls the GM's assistant. Now, what's happening in both of these scenes is not a staffing problem or a traditional training problem. It's a system maturity problem. These employees were not asking because they were lazy or disengaged. They were asking because the operation never built the clarity that would have made asking unnecessary. Now, here is where the real operational cost starts to show. This is the part most operators do not see clearly until it has already gotten expensive. Every new employee you bring on during summer staffing surge doesn't just add labor capacity. They also add question volume and dependency load on the exact people who are already carrying the most operational knowledge. HR is now not just managing new hire paperwork or compliance concerns. HR is also functioning as the answer system for an entire wave of people who have no established relationship with your documentation, your policies, or your self-service resources because one, they're new, and two, those things either do not exist in a usable form or were never made part of how people actually got trained to work. So the employees who eventually figure out how the operation really works become extremely valuable, but in a way that is operationally fragile. Because when they leave, they take the system with them. You've seen this. A long tenured front desk supervisor has moved on, and suddenly the team does not know how to handle a dozen situations that she used to handle automatically. Not because the situations changed, but because she was the system. There is also an emotional cost that really gets named. The people carrying this operational knowledge, the HR professionals, the experienced managers, and the informal knowledge holders on the floor, are holding the operation together in ways that never get documented, are never formally recognized, and are most definitely increasingly exhausting. That is not a personal resilience issue. That is what it feels like to be the infrastructure of an operation that was never built to run without you. So here's the reframe I want you to sit with. If your HR team is highly accessible and employees use them frequently, that is not automatically evidence of a healthy culture. It might look like it, but it's not. The question is not whether HR is accessible. The question is, what is the access being used for? See, there is a version of HR accessibility that is appropriate, where employees bring complex situations, sensitive interpersonal concerns, and judgment calls that require human context. That is HR functioning as designed. But there's another version where employees ask basic procedural questions. They seek permission for decisions that a clear policy should already authorize and confirm information that should live somewhere where they can find it without making a phone call. That version is not HR being supportive. That is HR absorbing the cost of a system that was never built. Mature leaders start paying attention to patterns, not individual questions. When the same category of questions keeps coming up from different employees across different shifts and across weeks, that is the operation signaling that the answer lives in a person when it should live in a system. So start there. What questions came to HR more than twice last month? Build that list and use it as your system's gap inventory. A Just Ask HR culture feels like connection from the inside. It feels warm, accessible, and people first. And I want to be direct about something. Accessibility to HR is important and valuable. HR professionals who are trusted, present, and responsive are an asset to your operation. But that is not the goal of operational maturity. A mature operation builds an environment where HR's time is protected and reserved for conversations that actually require HR. Complex, sensitive, judgment intensive situations, and where basic operational questions are answered before they ever become questions. That requires work most operations avoid for longer than they should. It requires building systems that carry institutional knowledge instead of that knowledge only living inside certain people. It requires documenting decisions in a way that employees can actually use in real time. It requires making expectations visible through repetition and not just communication, and ensuring that managers respond the same way to the same situations consistently enough that employees stop needing to ask. Because that is how clarity is created, not by telling people what to do once, but by reinforcing the same answer over and over again until the questions disappear. That is what operational maturity looks like. It is not less support, it is less dependency. It is not closing the door to HR, it is making sure HR is not the only door that works. When HR becomes the answer, people end up carrying what the operation should. And every day that gap remains unfixed, the operation becomes more dependent on the people carrying it, more fragile, and harder to scale. Your team deserves to work inside an operation with real answers. Your HR professionals deserve to spend their energy on work that actually requires their expertise. And your business deserves the stability that only comes when systems carry the knowledge instead of people. Because when systems carry the knowledge, consistency becomes repeatable, decisions become faster, confidence becomes visible, and the operation can run without depending on who is available in the moment. And that, my friends, is how better systems build better workplaces.